When the Nintendo Game Boy hit the market in 1989, the video game world was turned upside down because now you could play your games anywhere at any time. The screen of the system, though, left a lot to be desired, and it was often hard to see things when lighting was low, plus the screen was admittedly pretty small. In 1994, Nintendo released one of the coolest pieces of hardware ever, the Super Game Boy. Retailing at $59.99, the Super Game Boy allowed you to play your Game Boy library of games on your Super Nintendo and your television screen, and was one of the most unique pieces of hardware that Nintendo ever released. What's up guys, I'm RGT85. If this is your first time on the channel, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, but without any further ado, let's talk about the Super Game Boy and why it was and still is one of the most amazing pieces of hardware Nintendo has ever released. So at its core, the Super Game Boy is a pretty interesting attachment for the Super Nintendo, allowing you access to your entire library of Game Boy games. Inside of the Super Game Boy cartridge was the same hardware found inside of a standard Game Boy. There was a separate CPU inside of the adapter that handled the processing of the games, while the Super Nintendo was just mainly a way to display the games on the television screen. One interesting thing is that because of this, Game Boy games running on a Super Game Boy actually ran slightly faster than they would on a standard Game Boy, with a slight audio pitch adjustment as well. But back in 1994, nobody really cared about this. To use the Super Game Boy, you simply put a Game Boy game into the slot on the Super Game Boy, then attach the Super Game Boy into your Super Nintendo cartridge slot or clone system, and you turn the system on. While all the Game Boy games were compatible on the device, many games were enhanced for the device as indicated with branding. You can see that the Killer Instinct on the right has something that says Super Game Boy Game Pack, meaning that there were additional features added to the game that could only be accessed using a Super Game Boy. Many games feature different enhancements for the Super Game Boy, so I wanted to take a look at a variety of different titles on the Super Game Boy to show you the different features that you could do with the system and the games, as it's pretty remarkable how many different types of experiences you could end up getting when using a Super Game Boy to play your Game Boy games. The first game we're going to take a look at is Super Mario Land 2: 6 Golden Coins. Now, by pressing the L and R triggers on the Super Nintendo controller, you get access to a whole bunch of different options that, well, you wouldn't have access to if you were playing this on a standard Game Boy. Of course, one of the main options is the option to change the different colors for when you are playing the game. There's a whole bunch of preset color palettes that you can choose from, and trying to figure out which color palette works best for the game you're playing is actually kind of fun. You can see that there's great variety in the colors as well, so you really can find something that is tailor suited to your needs when you are playing a certain game, which I definitely appreciate. Next up, you can access things like different borders for your games as well. These different borders just add a little bit more customization to the games and really sort of immerse you in these games as well. A lot of the mini systems nowadays have a bunch of different borders you could choose from that I think is a really cool feature. Admittedly though, I usually just stick with the standard Super Game Boy color palette and the standard Super Game Boy border because I think that looks really cool as well, but you can really just sort of play around with it and have some fun with it. Next up, if you want to get really adventurous, you can actually create your own color palette. Now, since I'm not the most artistic person in the world, I really don't mess with this, but it is pretty cool and you could save a color code if you wanted to share that code with others as well. And finally, you can actually create your own little borders, and once again, I'm not the most creative person in the world, so I just drew like a little green line around things because I thought that looked kind of spiffy, and then we got into the actual game. Now, as far as actually playing the game is concerned, it plays pretty well. Like I said, it is slightly sped up when you are comparing it to a standard game playing on the Game Boy, but really, you can't notice it in terms of gameplay, I feel. You just sort of notice it maybe more so in the music, as the pitch is slightly turned up because of the increased speed in gameplay. But other than that, playing these games on your television screen is just absolutely fantastic, and I still think it holds up today, especially considering using a Super Nintendo controller. The Super Nintendo controller feels a lot better than holding a Game Boy in your hand because it definitely gives you a lot more control. Got such a nice D-pad, and the buttons are great as well. Next up, we're going to take a look at a Super Game Boy enhanced game, and that is Killer Instinct. Now, when you boot up Killer Instinct, you can see that, wow, there's a lot of cool stuff going on here. You have a lot more colors going on. You have this beautiful custom border with some of the Killer Instinct characters on it, and it really just makes this game stand out as one of the better Super Game Boy packs for the Super Game Boy attachment. Now, admittedly, I'm not the biggest Killer Instinct fan in the world. I was more of a Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat guy, but you could see that this game actually runs pretty decently on the Game Boy and is actually pretty fun. You can see there that the colors are changing, and basically by pressing a button on your Super Nintendo controller, you can switch between different color palettes that you have already pre-selected. So if you wanted to see what the game would look like when actually playing on a Game Boy versus playing on the Super Game Boy, you could sort of check that out. I actually kind of like this version of Killer Instinct. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, but I seem to be doing okay, and TJ Combo doesn't seem to like what I'm doing to him, so that's a very good thing. Next up is one of the more impressive games when you're playing a Super Game Boy, and that is Donkey Kong, also known as Donkey Kong 93. Now you can see here, Nintendo went all out with this game on the Super Game Boy. You have this beautiful title screen, you have this awesome little arcade cabinet that you are playing in when you are playing this game as the default standard border on it, and it just looks absolutely amazing. Now, if you've never played Donkey Kong 93, you would think right off the gate that this is just the standard Donkey Kong experience, and the first few levels are pretty much that. You're just trying to save Pauline by getting to the top of the mountain, and then of course trying to make Donkey Kong mad, where he continually goes up and up and up. Climbing up things is always pretty fun, but like I said, once you defeat the 4th level, you think that, okay, well, it's just going to be more sort of Donkey Kong stuff, but the game definitely really opens up, and it's sort of a hidden gem on the Game Boy, I feel, because, well, nobody ever really talks about this game. Donkey Kong runs off with Pauline, and then you get this really cool screen, and you're like, okay, well, this is definitely very different. Why is he going into this area here where there's a cityscape in the background? You can see that the Super Game Boy is allowing for a bunch of different colors as well, and things get very interesting once you enter this area. I honestly think that Donkey Kong 93 might have inspired the new Donk City level in Super Mario Odyssey, as you'll see here, because, well, now you're in a big city. Like, what is this? This is definitely very reminiscent of Super Mario Odyssey with New Donk City. The game kind of changes things up as well as you play it. Now it's sort of a puzzle game where you have to get the key that is located and then use it in the keyhole. You're not just going to the top of things now, you're going left to right and up and down as well, so it really adds a whole new level of gameplay to this game. I really enjoyed Donkey Kong 93, and I feel like the Super Game Boy Enhanced version of the game is really the definitive experience of this game, because you get things like additional colors and you get this awesome border background as well. But that's not the most impressive game when it comes to Super Game Boy games. No, no, no. The most impressive Super Game Boy game when it comes to Game Boy games is Space Invaders. And you might be saying to yourself, well, RGT, let's be serious here. It's Space Invaders. Like, what's the big deal? Sure, the little marquee, the little arcade marquee looks nice. You know, the screen itself looks nice. The colors look very nice. I get it. You know, you could do some different options here. You could play black and white, or you could play in full color, as we see here. Like, I get it. You know, that's pretty cool, but I wouldn't say this is the most impressive game. Of course, you could switch back and forth between the standard color palette that you would see on the standard Game Boy, and of course, get that nice full color palette. But still, I mean, it's just Space Invaders. What's the big to-do about this game? Well, if you looked closely, you would notice that at the start of the game, there was actually 2 different modes, Super Game Boy and Arcade Mode. Well, what's this Arcade Mode? Arcade Space Invaders are now invading your Super NES? What does that mean? Now you'll notice that all of a sudden the border goes away and it's a much more full image. And then things get pretty crazy. Taito, this Taito logo, this doesn't look like a Game Boy game. What is happening here? What has happened to the Game Boy? This is not a Game Boy game. And that is honestly the most amazing thing about Space Invaders on the Super Nintendo. There's actually a version of Space Invaders built into the Game Boy game that is only accessible via the Super Game Boy. You can only access the arcade version of it by using the Super Game Boy. And essentially what happens is this turns into a Super Nintendo game. You can tell by the full screen and of course the full color palette that is being used. This is only available to play on the Super Game Boy, which makes this just absolutely amazing. I honestly wish more companies would have done this with their Super Game Boy games, because it makes this game stand out. Essentially, this is a Super Nintendo game running via a Game Boy cartridge via an attachment that Nintendo made. It's just absolutely fascinating to see. And yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, well, it's just Space Invaders, but still, it's very cool to see something like this that is only accessible via the Super Game Boy. And I think things like this would have made the system even more attractive. Space Invaders is by far the most amazing Super Game Boy game, and I honestly can't believe I'm saying that. So as you can see, the Super Game Boy was honestly just an amazing piece of technology that I think still holds up today. Being able to play your Game Boy games in an enhanced version on your Super Nintendo was just unheard of at the time, and Nintendo absolutely knocked it out of the park with this device. I still have my Super Game Boy, I still love my Super Game Boy, and I think it's just one of the most interesting things that Nintendo has ever released for a Nintendo console. So let me know in the comment section down below what you think of the Super Game Boy. Is this something you have fond memories of? Do you still own one? And do you think it's just so cool how some of these games had little things hidden away and secrets with their Super Game Boy games that you can only access by using a Super Game Boy? And as always guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Be sure to check out other videos on the channel. If you enjoy retro videos like this, please be sure to share this video around so it gets good views and good comments, and I'll continue to do them. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.